afternoon, evening, and morning to everyone here. Welcome to today's WLG at-large session, where we are going to dive into the evolving landscape of legal practice and the indispensable skills that lawyers must cultivate for the future. My name is Ashley LaCroix. I'm the manager of member programs with World Law Group, and I'm delighted to introduce you to our speaker today, Ken Porter, the Director of Automation and Client Solutions at Minter Ellison in Australia. Ken is not only an experienced business leader, but also a digital transformation specialist with a wealth of knowledge in the legal technology space. He is leads a dynamic team that combines people expertise, best practice processes, and digital tools that deliver efficient and effective outcomes while enhancing client connectivity. Into the world marked by increasing interconnectedness, the legal profession is under a profound transformation, and today's lawyers need to adapt and embrace new skills to meet the expectations of clients in this ever-changing digital landscape. Ken will guide us through the concept of becoming a T-shaped lawyer. His insights were previously hailed as a very powerful session about modern lawyering at the most recent WLG Asia Pacific Regional Conference. So we're going to get to it, but first I just want to draw your attention to some housekeeping notes that we'll have in the chat. So just to reiterate, please update your names to include your first name and last name along with your firm. Take a few minutes at the end of this session to complete a short survey. And if you have any questions or comments along the way, please pop them into the chat. And without further ado, let's turn our attention to the future of lawyering with Ken.
Wonderful. Thanks very much, Ashley. Good morning, afternoon, evening, night, depending on which part of the world you're in and your time zone. I'm here in not so sunny Melbourne, which is not my hometown. I'm usually based in Brisbane, but here this time of year to visit the team. We have our Christmas party a little bit later on today, so I get to join them. Not necessarily dressed for the weather in Melbourne, probably more so for Brisbane, but I'm hoping it'll warm up a little bit for me a little later on today. It is 8 o'clock in the morning my time, so just to give you an indication of the time zone that I'm sitting in. Thanks for the intro, Ashley. As you mentioned, I'm the Director of Automation and Client Solutions here at Minter Ellison. And as some of you have probably gathered, I'm not a lawyer. More a technologist, a consultant, if you like. That's my background. And you might be asking the question, well, why is a non-lawyer providing a presentation on the future of being a lawyer? So I'll share a little bit more about the logic behind that a bit later on in the presentation, but hopefully some of the insights that I can provide around the background of what I do, but also what our broader team does, and how that is very much connected to what we see to be that broad skill set that's required by our lawyers going forward. And increasingly so into the future, but I'll refer to that as well. Now there are the chat facility in the Zoom that you can use to ask questions at any time. It's actually quite nice. I'm used to doing these type of sessions via a webinar setup, which means that I don't really get to see anybody's faces. But this is a standard Zoom, and I can see some of you on camera here. Sorry, I've got you down on my lower screen, so I'll look down occasionally. But please feel free to use the chat at any stage during the presentation. Ashley might stop me and ask some questions, which I'm happy to answer as we go. And I'll try and make sure that we fit all the content into the hour that we've got. All right, so the future of lawyering, and in particular, today I'm going to talk about what's termed the T-shaped lawyer. And this might be a term that some of you have heard of previously. It's certainly not my term. It's not our term here in Australia. It's used quite broadly. And as per the title screen, there's a few other models around what a lawyer should look like that I'll refer to. But predominantly today, I'm going to focus on the T-shaped lawyer. So to begin with, just very briefly, let's make sure on my presentation. I'll talk a bit about the evolution of the lawyer, at least as far as these models are concerned. So I think that probably the majority of people on today's call are lawyers, or I would assume at least work very closely with lawyers like myself. I'm going to take you through a few different stages, I guess. And of course, this is not all kind of cut and dry, but at a very high level, some of the models that have shaped what the lawyer looks like. And I guess we start from the very beginning to what we'd say is an I-shaped lawyer. And really what we're looking at here is in the in the axis going down, we're really looking at what are the depth of the skill sets that a lawyer might hold. And this goes true for any profession, particularly in professional services. But as you can see by the model here, the indication is there is a deep skill set in legal knowledge and other traditional skills that have gone along with lawyering. Up the top, there's obviously a bit of a focus on soft skills. As part of being a lawyer, we need to engage with our clients. Obviously, some business knowledge around the businesses that our clients would operate in or the environments that they operate in. Very traditional kind of lawyer skill set. The T-shaped, going the wrong way. The T-shaped model is really kind of taking that basis, but starting to broaden out the top. Now, the important thing with the T-shaped model here is the vertical axis is really showing that depth of expertise. I said the horizontal axis at the top is breadth. Yeah? And you will notice that obviously that horizontal axis is not deep in terms of the level of the skill set, if you like, but quite broad in terms of the breadth of the type of skills that a person might hold. So as you can see here, when we start looking at the T-shape, we still have that depth and expertise around a particular area, a particular practice of law, which might be the case, but building out this breadth in skill set. And in this case, around things like teamwork, communication, networking, critical thinking, project management. So this is the basis of how we start to form that T. And then it continues to evolve, and there are many different versions of a T-shaped lawyer, but this kind of one of the, if you like, earlier versions of that framework, where we continue to have that depth in legal skills, knowledge of the law, and that breadth in other areas. And it might be classified as whether it's other competencies or knowledge, qualities, different mindsets, and of course, other non-legal skills that a lawyer might need to possess. But I will say, it's not just T-shaped. Yeah, there are many other models which might represent how a lawyer might need to operate. One, not as common, but some of you may have heard of, is this O-shaped lawyer framework. Very different approach to this. I think it essentially assumes that skill set, that legal skill set exists with the lawyer, but this is how you round out, if you like, the skill set of the lawyer with other areas, as you can see listed on the screen. And obviously they've chosen to start everything with an O, but whether it is around optimism. So this is saying a rounded out lawyer is not really focused on all the things that are wrong from a legal perspective, but thinking a little bit more optimistically about what are the positives for a particular client in a given situation. The ownership around technical-based training, open-mindedness, opportunistic, original. So this is a very different perspective on what a rounded out lawyer might look like, but it gives you an indication of the other kind of models that might be referred to. Another interesting one, and I won't play the video, but of course, I think we'll share the deck with you after the presentation. Feel free to have a look. This is a Delta model where the focus here, and this is taken from other industries, but as you can see by the triangle to this side of the slide, looking at things like the people involved in the process that is around the work that needs to be done, and the actual practice of law. And really, depending on your matter, depending on where your focus is, what elements of that triangle need to be brought in most for the benefit of that particular matter that you might be working on, or that engagement that you're involved in. Okay. So this is really a different model around looking at how you have a breadth of skill set, but then you draw on particular areas of focus to most benefit the delivery of the engagement you're working on. Again, it's just another way of looking at how we might operate as a lawyer to the best benefit of our clients, or the best benefit of the engagement that we're working on. So as you can see, lots of different theories, lots of different shapes around what the lawyer might look like. But as I said earlier today, really, our focus is going to be on this T. And again, this is another version of the T, but what I would like you to take away from this particular, I'll refer to this diagram a little bit later on in the presentation as well, is that again, there's that depth in a particular area of knowledge or skill, obviously the legal expertise, but then there's this breadth in skill set. Now, as you can see here, there are a lot of skills that have been classified in this horizontal axis, but they are the be all and end all. This isn't the T. There is no the T. is my belief and my theory. And all of these elements that are lined up across the top, depending on your practice, depending on your firm, depending on the nature of the clients that you engage with, to some degree, even depending on the actual engagement you're involved in with a particular client at a particular time, the elements of that T or the elements of the T that you might employ for that engagement will change. So there are some really, I think, useful aspects that are mentioned here. I'll refer to them later on, but this is not to say this is what the T is, this is what your skill set should look like. But this is a version of the T, and think about how that horizontal axis can be interchangeable depending on what the needs of your client and your engagement are. All right, so that's a little bit about the evolution of these models. So I think for me, what's always important to refer to when we talk about these things is what's driving the evolution. And for me, particularly in my space, as Ashley said, I guess our team focuses on digital transformation, and we've very much got a number of different strategies around our digital transformation strategy. Obviously, more recently, probably no surprise to anybody, our generative AI strategy is a big focus. What we always ensure that we're very much keeping in mind is what is driving these strategies, what's driving this evolution, what's driving the changes in the landscape that our lawyers operate in. And there are a number of different factors, but to me, one of the big factors, which I think is a key element here, is this graph. This one's a little bit old. As you can see, it's data out of the US. It's back from 2020, so it's almost 4 years ago now. But I think we will see that this has plateaued a little bit, but the trend will still increase. What this graph is representing here, as you can see by the title, the percentage change in the number of employed lawyers by practice setting. And these three lines across the graph are really looking, government is one element, law firms being the darkest line, the black line at the bottom. And you can see, yes, there's been an increase in the number of lawyers employed, but it's been growing at a fairly steady rate. But of course, that orange line being in-house teams. And I'd be interested, maybe we don't have time to discuss today, but interested in your thoughts or your experiences in other parts and other regions throughout the world. But this, as I said, US data, it's certainly been reflected here in Australia as well. We've seen the evolution of the in-house legal team for a lot of our large clients change drastically, not only in terms of the number of lawyers that are employed by many of our clients, but also the nature of other skill sets that the in-house legal teams have either expanded themselves with, or the increased engagement that they have with other skill sets and other functions within their business, which we didn't see as much previously. Even 5-10 years ago looked very different. But that is an area that continues to evolve and continues to increase. And we'll speak to that a little bit more in the next slide as well. So that, I think, massive factor, the influence, of course, particularly for us as a law firm, and I'm sure for many of you, what are our drivers? Our drivers are our client, and our drivers are the legal industry. So when our client has a focus on what they want to receive from the law firm, either in terms of deliverables or in terms of the method of provision of service, they're influenced by these legal teams and how they operate. And those legal teams are influenced by their businesses and what their businesses expect them to produce. So let me cover off on a few things here around the legal landscape. These are really broad areas, but I do want to touch on them in a little bit more detail. And this is in no way a comprehensive list of all the factors that are really impacting our industry's landscape, but I think a few fairly critical ones. So I'll start maybe from my side, the left-hand side of the flower, if you like. The doing more with less and the evolving expectations, I think, refers to the area that I just spoke about. I think we have certainly seen, for those of you who've been in the space for a long time, gone are the days where at the end of the month, we can accumulate the time that we spent on a matter, we throw it on an invoice with an hourly rate, we give it to the client pays the invoice. Obviously, there are still many engagements where that's the case, but I think there is a lot more scrutiny on the amount of time that lawyers spend on engagement by the client, instead of just saying, It's legal, it's part of us running our business, it's cost the business, we just need to pay it. We've got no choice but to engage with external counsel. There is a lot more scrutiny and a lot more pressure for the law firm or any external counsel to do more with less. Yeah. How can we deliver that same product? How can we deliver to that same standard without incurring as much of that time? And there's much more scrutiny on that time, on those narratives, to say what is that time actually being spent on, and even is it at the right level? What have we got our junior lawyers doing? What have we got our senior lawyers doing? Part of the reason why a lot of law firms in particular areas of practice are starting more and more to move away from that model of charging based on time and materials, and looking at other fixed fee pricing or value-based pricing, or even other alternatives for our clients as well. I think the evolving expectations comes from that pressure that a lot of our legal teams, in-house legal teams, receive from within their business. The in-house team has always been a cost center to most businesses. They more often than not, or at least haven't been able to very effectively articulate how they contribute to the bottom line of the business, but instead are seen as a cost of doing the business. And that increased pressure from the business to reduce those costs, to increase that profit margin, has meant that there's a different set of expectations that are coming out of in-house teams to the law firm around what we deliver. How can we deliver it at less cost? How can we deliver it more quickly? How can we speak to the objectives of the organisation more broadly, even though that might not be the focus of the particular legal engagement? How do our deliverables contribute to the objectives, the broader objectives of the business? How does it link to the strategy of the business? For a lot of our larger, more strategic clients, our teams are getting much more involved in those discussions around how does the work that we do as external counsel contribute to the overall objectives, the strategic objectives of the client's organisation. Some of the other ones, capacity challenges and the Great Resignation. I'm sure I've asked for people to put their hands up. I'm sure everybody has been impacted by capacity challenges. It's hard to find people. It's hard to retain people. So there are always going to be challenges around being able to not only having to do more with less, but sometimes having no choice. We just don't have as many people, whether that's obviously in lawyers as well, but even in my space in technology, particularly the last 2, 3, 4 years has been incredibly challenged, a very challenging talent market to retain talent and to be able to obviously find new talent. So those capacity challenges are really an ongoing issue. I don't see that really. I think it decreased somewhat in the last year, but I don't think we'll see it become less of a challenge in the next 2 to 3 years. It'll be interesting to see what Gen AI brings, but I'll speak to that a little bit later on. Great Resignation, I think, was something that came out of COVID. A lot of people were looking for a seat change, looking for a career change. We thankfully weren't impacted too much by that, but we had a lot of clients who spoke to the fact that they lost a lot of people through that period. And to the capacity challenges piece, struggled to find new people. Technology I'll come to last. Risk and regulatory landscape, you don't need me to speak to. That's always evolving and always changing, and we need to keep up with that. I think even more so, particularly given some of the changes in the technology space. Same with our clients' businesses continuing to rapidly change and evolve. But one of the biggest influences on all of that is the changes in technology. And I think, as I'm sure you might all agree, whether you are all using the generative AI technologies that have become available to us, particularly over the last 12 months, or whether you're just worried about the impact that those technologies might start to have in our industry, what has really been the experience for us, and I'm sure for most others in most industries, is the pace with which that change has been hitting our areas, and how quickly these technologies are evolving. And how quickly we're having to try and deal with that change, the new technologies that are coming out, and how quickly you might develop a solution and within weeks, months, even sometimes within days, how outdated they can become. That pace of change with technology is at a level which I don't think we've ever experienced, but I think that'll only continue to increase. Some elements around what's impacting the legal landscape. Kind of related to that, here, I think just in a word cloud, I've brought up some different titles, some of which have been around for a long time in the legal space. I'm sure Many of you have heard of the likes of legal project managers, or even the bottom, legal knowledge managers, or something along those lines, and even some of the others as well. But I think, and it's certainly our experience, that some of these other titles we have seen increasingly introduced into the legal space, whether that's and not all of these are titles in our teams here at Minter Ellison, but some of them certainly are, or go by a slightly different title, but for the same purpose. There's a couple in there around automation. Obviously, as per my title, automation is a big focus of what we do. So we're looking to try and automate anything that can be automated. So a lot of automation skill sets that come into the business. One of my direct reports, who runs our process automation capability, he actually came into our team some years ago, but he came into our team from manufacturing, where his claim to fame was that he was able to shave 3 seconds off a manufacturing process, which in an industry where they're producing units by the tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands every day, 3 seconds is a big impact. Now, of course, that's different in the legal landscape, but taking that same mentality, that same skill set, that focus on improvement, particularly relevant to our space in the sense of legal processes and how we operate as a firm. You can see titles in there around process improvement. We have a continuous improvement function, which I'll refer to later. This is really, again, demand from the market. And even a lot of our clients are asking about process. Please share with us your approach to this process. Please share with us process maps in terms of how you perform this work. So we need skill sets around this kind of process improvement in order to be able to facilitate that for our clients. And then there's a machine learning engineer title that's in there, but even a title which I'd be interested to hear if some of you have seen. This is now a little bit old. It came out earlier this year. Some of you might be familiar with this firm in London. I won't try and pronounce the name, but this is also another title in the legal space that we're seeing a little bit more of. Not hundreds yet, but I think will continue to evolve. But I can guarantee you there are a lot of people trying to develop this skill set in the legal landscape. Title here, GPT Legal Prompt Engineer. And I don't know if everybody on the call is familiar with this concept of prompt engineering. Please feel free to ask the question if you don't, but I will refer to it again a little bit later on in the presentation. But this is around this generative AI skill set. And this already in many industries, this prompt engineering role is fetching some pretty high salaries for a person that can bring a depth in this skill set. Now, I'll highlight for this particular role, and this is the ad that was released publicly, but you can see under that skills and experience section, interestingly, that for this role, they are looking ideally for a person with a deep understanding of legal practice, maybe even a degree in law, and a deep understanding of law firm operations, probably, but not necessarily gained from working at a law firm. Now, I highlighted those because to me, this is potentially another example of that T-shaped lawyer. And even in our team, I work as part of the broader digital team here at Minter Ellison. We have quite a few, if you like, ex-lawyers in our team, people who've practiced and who've broadened out their skill set and then moved, still working in the law firm, but moving to a very different space, focused on the digital technologies that we use. Now, I did say to you earlier, I'd explain why is it me presenting this session today. So let me touch on that briefly. I've already explained a little bit about my role. I report into our Chief Digital Officer, so I'm very much part of the digital team. My team, obviously, as the name suggests, we're focused on automation and client solutions, but essentially, very broadly, any of the technologies, any of the process improvement that we do to deliver services to our clients is what my team focuses on. Under our Chief Digital Officer, our team falls under the broader banner of what we call here legal operations. And I'm hoping that for most of you on the call, legal operations is not an unfamiliar term. And maybe if it's not actually termed legal operations in your market, certainly I would think the concepts that would fall under our definition of legal operations would be familiar to to some extent and are performed by other parts of the business possibly. I won't go through it in detail, but you can see here the infographic on the page. These are kind of the key areas for us as a legal operations group that we focus on and how we work with our teams, whether that's leveraging technology, whether that's looking at how we use data, but certainly to this side, the right-hand side of the slide, certainly how we deliver efficiently is a big focus of our teams, and our enhancing our effectiveness of delivery is a key thing that we do. So this is the how. So to delve a bit more into legal operations, and I don't know if everybody is familiar with CLOC, or as you can see down the bottom of the slide, the Corporate Legal Operations Consortium. Depending on which region you're in, I'd be very surprised if there isn't a CLOC chapter, which might exist somewhere in your region. And if you aren't familiar with CLOC, CLOC I think was established in around 2010. So a bit over 10 years now, almost 14 years. I think now the membership is around the 6,000 mark, members globally. And I think CLOC chapters exist in probably somewhere between 50 to 60 countries. As the name suggests, it was the Corporate Legal Operations Consortium initially started by proactive members of in-house legal teams and inviting membership from only in-house legal teams. So when it was first established, it was a very closed network, in particular closed to law firms. It was an in-house group of people who were gathering together saying, hey, we're getting pressure from our businesses. How do we do our legal in-house functions better? And how do we get more out of law firms? How do we engage with them more effectively? How can we ensure their delivery is what we need? How can we ensure that we're paying what we should be paying for the services that we receive from law firms? CLOC has since opened up a little bit more, and we're inviting of law firms into the fold or other vendors and technology into the fold. But still the underlying focus of CLOC is really looking at how the legal operations of the in-house teams and then working with their external counsel is continuing to be optimized. So this is CLOC's definition of legal operations: set of business processes, activities, and the professionals that enable legal departments to serve their clients more effectively by applying business and technical practices to the delivery of legal services. Simply put, it's the how we deliver, focusing on the how. Legal operations professionals that are referred to, this is a definition from the College of Law here in Australia, but really what does it come down to? It's a very broad category of skills, whether that might be in the technology space, but it might be in other spaces. Again, whether it's around project management, whether it's around finance, even talent, for example, or human resources, if you like, process expertise, data analytics, all of these categories that are focused on how the delivery of legal services is performed and how it is improved, how it is optimized, is everything that sits, or is the focus of legal operations professionals. So we've got a lot of broad skill sets that come into that space. If I were to use a cartoon, this is the simple description. We like to use this one a lot. It's a bit old, but the legal operations professional is that guy with the round wheels. Our lawyers are busy people. Our lawyers have KPIs that they need to meet in terms of the billable time they record every day. So they're focused on the doing. They need to churn through and get the work performed. They're not focused on how it's done, not necessarily the planning, not necessarily everything about the project management, but just getting the work done, getting it performed. It's the legal operations professional that's trying to work with those lawyers to say, how can we make this work easier, better? How can we take some of the more mundane work away from you? That's what our legal operations professionals are focused on. These are some elements of what makes up the legal operations toolkit here at Minter Ellison. Continuous improvement or process improvement, which I mentioned earlier, is really looking at what's the process around how we deliver our work. And interesting to mention that in the early stages, I think a lot of our legal professionals struggled with this concept of process, because I'm sure many of you would agree, Every matter that you have is different. Every client that you work with is different. Even all the matters for that one particular client differ each time you engage. So a lot of our lawyers would say to us, everything I do is bespoke. Every matter is different. How can I apply a consistent process to the work that I do? But our focus was to step back and put it at a higher level. What is that overarching process for this particular nature of matter that you work on? What is that overarching process that you do pretty much each time at a high level, which is more often than not repeatable at the highest level? And then we say, what are the blockers in that process? What are the parts of that process where there's a bottleneck, or it takes more time, or it always incurs more effort? And then we try to analyze those areas and say, how can we make that better? Sometimes we can, sometimes we can't. But it's really first focus on understanding our process so that we can then determine how we might tackle improving it. Other areas I'm sure you might be familiar with. I won't go through all of these individually. But of course, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Workflow automation is very much related to that process. So it's looking at, we take that process as a business process, and then we think about how can we automate elements of that process. So for example, the allocation of a particular nature of task to a particular person or to a particular role within a legal team, and the deadlines around that, we use a system to be able to automate that process. So rather than the senior lawyer having to determine who does this task and when is it due, and have you finished it yet? It's 2 days out. Have you progressed it? Rather than that being a manual process to be managed, we use the system to automate that. So it's workflow automation. Document automation, I'm sure you're familiar with, and some of those other elements. And artificial intelligence, or particularly like Gen AI, is another huge space, and I think is going to have a massive impact on how we deliver services to clients, or maybe more importantly, how our clients expect we deliver services to them and utilize this technology. Touch on more later. So keep an eye on time. Legal project management is critical, I think. And if I was to look at that T-shaped model skill set and that breadth of skills across the top, in my view, obviously a little bit biased because legal project management here at Minters sits under my remit, but I think LPM would sit in every T-shaped lawyer's horizontal axis at the top. Needs to be an element of it. Our high-level focus of our strategy of LPM here is, if we were to ask any lawyer across the business who is responsible for LPM, we have an LPM function. Our LPM lead reports into me. He has some resources who are legal project managers who get deployed on matters. But our focus is, if we ask any of our lawyers who is responsible for LPM, that at least our senior lawyers, their response would be, I am. As the senior lawyer driving this matter, the responsibility for legal project management sits with me. Sometimes I need to engage assistance with that. Sometimes I will rely on other resources to do that. But ultimately, the project management of this engagement and the responsibility for that sits with me. So I won't go through it in detail, but here we look at these different levels of support that our legal project management team might provide our legal teams. Whether at the simplest level, it just starts with advice. Here's how you might approach your matter. Here's how you might set it up. Here's what you need to engage a client with, all the way through some more hands-on assistance, more in-depth consultation with both our legal teams and with the client, and then actually really hands-on project management, which our team would typically only do if it's a very large engagement across jurisdictions, across different practice areas, complex requirements on the client end, and possibly a bit of project management required on their end as well. Then our resources would be deployed on that matter, and typically we would charge our client in some form for that work. But if LPM is not a space you're familiar with, it's not complex. Yes, there are tools that can be used which you might need to get used to, but this concept of project management, and it is project management in essence. Legal project management is just putting legal at the beginning of it. This basis of really sound project management, planning before a matter kicks off, I think is really critical. And certainly I think whether they articulate it or not, the expectation of almost all of our clients on the work that we do, they know that it's being effectively project managed. They know that we can produce artifacts to give them comfort that the necessary project management is in place. Really important. Very quickly, continuous improvement here in Minter Ellison, or process improvement, if you like. We developed a methodology, which the symbol in the middle of the slide is, if you're not familiar with it, Lean Six Sigma, which interestingly enough came out of manufacturing. Toyota were the kind of first organization to really employ it. But this, if you can see that the outside of the signal to define, measure, analyze, improve, and control, the concepts of this methodology we took and we looked at applying it to process within legal. So those elements that I referred to earlier, where we map the process, we call it the as-is or the existing process. We map the as-is process. We identify where those bottlenecks, where those constraints are, where there is wastage in the process, and we look at how we can remove the waste, how we can refine the process and improve it. Importantly, before we apply technology to it, before we apply automation to it. So we have this mentality that if you take a bad process and you digitize it, you only magnify the inefficiencies. But if you take an optimized process and digitize it, then you increase the efficiencies. So it's a very important part of our practice. I have a team, this is all they do. They just work with all of our teams and also with our clients, because many of our clients are interested in this as well, sitting down and workshopping process, mapping it out, improving it. With all of these outcomes, targeted outcomes on the side, it's about improving the performance, about improving client satisfaction, increasing speed of delivery, reducing risk, obviously efficiencies. I believe really important concept. Look, I won't touch on this too much. This is something that our team doesn't do a lot of. We do a little bit of service design, sometimes with our teams, but also with clients. But we also have another team within the business who works very closely with us. We call our legal optimization team, who are actually an external focused team who go out and work with clients, particularly with in-house teams, and those in-house teams that struggle to improve the way that they operate, because typically their businesses are not focused on legal function. If they're in manufacturing, they're focused on manufacturing, or in real estate, they're focused on real estate. They're not focused on the business of legal services. So our teams will work with those in-house teams to really understand their functions and how they can be improved, how technology can be utilized more effectively, how they can deliver more value back to their business. And a part of that might be a legal design. So I won't go into detail here, but it is an area that we're certainly seeing a lot more from our clients. They don't necessarily articulate legal design, but they're ultimately saying to us, we need to redesign, we need to optimize the way that we operate as a function, and we might employ some of the techniques that are captured under legal design to help them do that. So I'm covering all of this stuff, and you might be looking at it and going, yeah, but for me as a lawyer, what are you saying? Are you saying that we all need to become legal operations professionals? Is that the message that I'm trying to share here? I guess I just want to highlight at this point, no, it's definitely not. I'm not saying that everybody should become a legal operations professional. I'm not saying you need to go out and have a Lean Six Sigma skill set, or you need to go deeply into AI and understand the technologies and how they work. Not deeply, but I think developing understanding and awareness, being able to know enough to identify those triggers when you're in conversations with clients to say, hey, what you're articulating to me is actually a process issue that we need to tackle with you, or what you're articulating to me is a technology issue with a particular type of technology that you might not be employing yet. Knowing enough to identify those triggers, and then if they're available to you either within your organization or outside through vendors, to engage the right people to bring into that scenario is very powerful. And it's really, for our firm, what we focus on for our lawyers is creating that awareness so they know who they can call on or what skill sets they might need to call on to be able to service a particular issue or an opportunity that their clients might present to them, even if it's not clearly articulated. So that awareness and understanding is that horizontal access. It's just about knowing enough. about those areas to say, who do I need to talk to? What's the skill set? What's the opportunity that exists? Is this a process problem? Is it a technology problem? Is it a change problem? A lot of change problems exist. Knowing enough about those areas to help clients identify that, because it's definitely the case here at Minters, our lawyers are the first point of contact with our clients. I have one team, my team's, how many are we now? 40 something, but that's 40 something across our whole firm. Yeah. We have 1,700-800 lawyers. So my team can't engage with every legal team and every client. So we rely on our lawyers who engage with our clients to identify that opportunity, and when necessary, come to us and say, hey, we need your team skill set in this space to work with us for this client. For them to do that effectively, they need to understand it at that highest level. And that's, to me, what being a T-shaped lawyer is all about. So let me touch on a few things around how to develop the team. Now, you might have particular areas of interest. You might want to go deep in some, you might want to go shallow in others. The internet is your friend, but there are many opportunities quite often that are available online for you to do courses and certifications, if you're really that motivated to do it. Again, there's some on the screen here, whether it's change, whether it's Lean Six Sigma, whether it's project management. I'm not saying you need to go out and get certifications. If you're motivated and you have the interest, that's great. But again, just understanding these areas, I think, can be important to you. Tools like this, we're very lucky here at Minters. We made the choice 3 years ago, maybe, to go down the LinkedIn Learning track. So all of our employees have access to LinkedIn Learning. And I know that for many of you, LinkedIn itself can be quite an annoying, almost a social media app for work. But LinkedIn Learning, wow, deep and broad. There's so much, almost in any area, in any field. Quality of courses obviously can differ a little bit, but as you can see here, when you search for them, they give you ratings so that you can get a sense on what are the courses that people have really benefited from. You don't need LinkedIn Learning, but access to this kind of learning outside in other realms, I think, is really key. Even if it's block out an hour during the week or take an hour on the weekend to devote to that T in an area which you might be interested in or you think might benefit for you, I think is really invaluable. And really, there's so much that's available at a cost, but also free. If you're interested in the technology space, really take a look at some of the Microsoft sites or the Amazon AWS sites. There's a lot of free content that these providers have available because they want to hook you into their products, right? But there's a lot of really useful content that they have available for free, which you can access, and it starts at that very fundamental level, so you can get that level of understanding, which might help you go further. So really, read books. Got a book up there from Richard Susskind. If you're not familiar with him, he's got some interesting perspectives. There's different books that are available in this space. Talk to the T-shaped lawyer. LinkedIn, there's lots of groups and forums that can be followed, even Twitter. And then there's some more specific sites. Clock over the years have developed a lot of content, which can be really useful, obviously focused on their in-house teams, but can be very useful to lawyers and law firms as well. And there are a lot of other sites, just some of which I've mentioned here, which also generate a lot of content. And typically, if you're not wanting to go too deep, it's the right level. It's broad, high level, it touches on these areas, it helps develop an understanding, which to me, I think is the key piece, that what you want to achieve in the first instance before you might decide, okay, what other areas of the T do I want to maybe go a little bit deeper in? Great places to start. Now to touch on towards the end, this was really in the early stages. If any of you are familiar with it, this is one of the very early editions of ChatGPT. And what I was doing here was just showing how even a tool like ChatGPT or Bard or whatever you might like to use, there's so much available to you at the moment. Even these are great tools for even in the legal space to learn more, just by putting a prompt in saying, what is a T-shaped lawyer? And teach me, and you might even see, if you can see, it's covered on my screen, but I think you can see it on this slide. I even got the prompt wrong. I said, tech me, but teach me about design thinking. It can produce this content really high level, not a lot of in-depth, but you can take it further. Even this is a great place to start building that skill set, building that understanding. And here was a bit of an example of where I, just one particular scenario that I put in to show you how even using something as generic as ChatGPT can often assist with the work that you're performing. Now, obviously the big issue that if any of you have been looking into this space, you're probably dealing with, same issue we're dealing with, is obviously the security of data and the information that's put onto these platforms. There's nothing client specific here, it's very generic. We're looking at different technologies that we can use where it is secure so that we can do client work. We just earlier this week had some media on some of the work that we're doing with large language models. We developed a solution which we call the Minter-Ellison Advice Generator, which is using these large language models. We used a model, an open AI model that's available to us here in our region, so we can keep it in jurisdiction. It's our secure instance of it, and we've built a user interface that allows our lawyers to upload content, whether that be legislation, whether that be previous advices, whether that be other kind of more practice-based content that they've developed over the years, and essentially take a client instruction, load that into the interface saying, I want a legal advice around a particular issue. And a bit like ChatGPT, you put the instruction in and the large language model will go away, reference the content that you've loaded, and draft the first cut of the legal advice along with the citations from the content that it's utilized to draft that legal advice. We're not using large language models to produce the final output that we would send to a client, and we worked with a partner in our environment and planning practice, and in his words, it's essentially taking what he would have tasked a junior lawyer to do and would have taken that junior lawyer 2 to 4 hours, depending, essentially getting the large language model to do that, and it produces the output in 30 seconds to a minute. So this is the kind of work that I think we'll see more and more across our industry, and the utilization of this technology, because our clients are going to expect it. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, it's about us being able to produce our work more swiftly at a reduced cost. And I think whoever gets to that point first, most successfully, and without high levels of risk, I think will be those who are most successful in this space. So what am I pointing to here? This is a Microsoft specific example. As you can see, it references Copilot. I'm not too sure if any of you have been able to access Microsoft Copilot yet. We were included in Microsoft's early access program for Copilot, but it's now generally available to any Microsoft clients, even privately. If you pay $30 US a month, you can access Microsoft Copilot, and using generative AI, as the name as the name indicates, it's like an assistant for you across your Microsoft 365 apps. What's here on this slide, though, is Microsoft's suggestion on what forms a good prompt. Now, I spoke to prompt engineering earlier, and when it comes to large language models or generative AI, the skill set here, yes, there are, of course, very deep technical skill sets that people need to have to do this kind of work. But the skill set here is really around how do you write a good prompt to get the large language model to do what you want, to get the output that you're seeking. How do you prompt it? How do you instruct it in the most effective way? And this is Microsoft's attempt at saying, these are the elements that make a good prompt. Make sure you articulate the goal, give the large language model the context. If there is source information, then give it the source that it needs to take that information from, and set very clear expectations in terms of how you want that output to be. And I think that's a very good general guide into what a good prompt should look like, Copilot or otherwise. So if you're looking for things to do this is Christmas holidays, spend a bit of time looking at prompt engineering. I think it will be a benefit for you in going into the future. Now, I'm conscious of time. I've only got 7 minutes left. This last section here, I was really looking at things around practical application of the T. And what I'd suggest is, particularly given that today is the webinar session, we won't go through these scenarios and discuss them as such. Again, we'll share this deck with you. You can have a look at these. These are just 2 scenarios, very general, that I've put together into this deck. I'm sure that you would have many other experiences and could come up with many more. But it was really with the aim to think about if these scenarios are the kind of things you might encounter when you're engaging with your clients. Again, if we think about that T, that piece that I mentioned earlier around identifying what elements of the T might be able to help clients address these issues or address these opportunities, and which areas would you want to employ, or which skill sets would you need to call on that you could either use yourself or you could reach out to the relevant professionals to provide further assistance with. So I'll leave those with you to take away. As I said, I'm sure you can think of many other scenarios as well that link to those elements of the T that you might want to introduce. And I think the takeaway really, it's just all about developing your own T. So again, here's a generic one. Here's elements that may or may not be relevant to you, but ultimately at the end of the day, and certainly include elements where you have an interest. Develop your own T. Define what's the T that makes sense to you. What are those skill sets which are going to benefit you in terms of building a level of understanding and awareness? What are the skill sets that you might even want to go a little bit deeper in because of the clients that you work with, because of the industries that you're operating in, or just because of the interests that you have? I implore you really think about developing your own T in the areas that you would want to focus on. So with that, Ashley, I'll stop there. I think we've got 5 minutes left. If there's any questions from the audience, happy to take questions, but otherwise I hope everyone's found at least some elements of that useful. Actually, you've been caught with the on mute. On mute one.
I had it off so that you didn't hear my dogs. Thank you very much, Ken. I certainly found that very interesting. And I think this is a great takeaway and exercise for everybody who's on the call to go off and do a little homework over the next few weeks and develop your own T. So thank you very much for sharing this insight with us. Does anybody have any questions that they wanted to either come off mute or pop into the chat before we go?
I have one slight question, and thank you very much. And I'll definitely share with our innovation officer and her team. Maybe if you could explore a bit more of your career and about your team. For how long do you have a team dedicated to that? That I would appreciate.
Sure thing. Sorry, the audio on mine is not great, but I think I was able to get your question. So about my team, well, my team's quite diverse, I guess, and a fair breadth to our remit. So obviously, as per my title, automation is a big focus, but automation in legal is very broad, right? So we have one of my teams is a team that's focused on document automation. Obviously, a big part of what our law firms do is our outputs are obviously documents. So we look at opportunities, particularly for those documents that we generate at scale, to leverage automation to do that. And with that's integrated with our, I mentioned the workflow automation systems that we use. So we have some systems which our lawyers use to manage their matters, that they also capture data points from those matters in that system. So the parties that are involved in the matter, or the dates, the issues, etc., that might be depending on the area of practice that relate to that, captured in the system. We then use those data points for the purposes of document automation, so to generate documents, to be automating the entry of parties into documents and to generate different versions. Automation is a big part of what we do. Layered over the top of that is everything in the AI space. So that's probably been a big focus of our team, particularly over the last 12 months. Everybody was starting from pretty much scratch, but how you develop this generative AI skill sets, how we learn about large language models and what they do. So, and we don't do it alone. We work very closely with a lot of our vendors. Part of the reason I'm in Melbourne at the moment, we have our Christmas party today, but we have a team who's in the midst of a Gen AI lab workshop with AWS, with Amazon. And we're working on a solution with Amazon's help, also with another external partner in the e-discovery space to look at how we leverage large language models to further benefit. There's a lot of technology that already exists in that space, but to further benefit the outputs for our legal teams and for our clients, we're looking at how we leverage large language models to do that. So all of that, it's AI, much of it is a sense of how we automate the work that we do. It's just what are we using in the background to automate it? In this case, it's using large language models. And really everything that we do in the AI space relates to how we can remove some of that kind of more labor-intensive work that our legal teams might do and then produce the outputs for our clients. LPM, as I said, is part of our team, and I think LPM fits nicely because the LPM is really, it's project management, but it's how we bring all of the aspects of delivering a matter together to provide that final output in the most effective and efficient way. So a lot of the things that our LPM team would work on with our legal teams, or a lot of the tools that we develop for the use by our legal teams, then links into, okay, if we're using that tool, if we're looking for more efficiencies, what is the automation that we can do to further facilitate efficiencies in that matter? And then how does that impact the reporting that we provide to our clients? So LPM is a key part of that. But then the other two main functions in my team, I mentioned the continuous improvement. So it's that focus on process, looking at mapping the process. And look, I tell you, it's amazing. I love sitting in these sessions. We do these workshops where we sit down with our legal teams and we bring all the relevant different roles in a legal team. And we start with brown paper on the wall and post-it notes. And we say, okay, what's the first thing you do? What do you do next? What do you do next? And we map the whole process out for their matter. And then we go back to the first step and we say, okay, that step 1 to step 2, how long does that take? Yeah. How long does it take to complete step 1? How long does it take to complete step 2? How much time elapses between step 1 and step 2? Yeah. And then we identify where that time wastage exists and we say, why? How can we reduce it? How can we remove it? And almost, I would say 95% of the time, we sit in a workshop all day with our legal teams. And at the end of the day, our legal teams sit back and they go, wow, is that what we do? I didn't know you did that. We've had partners in a session sit there with the secretary at the other end of the table going, did you do that? And the secretary's going, yeah, I do that in all matters. You didn't know I did that? They come away with this understanding of what the process is. And then many of them say, can you give us that process so we can use it as a training tool for our people? Because they've never thought to capture the process. So we capture the process, we optimize it. We've got a transition team that helps us take the business process and figure out how we can digitize that and how we can take our lawyers on the change journey to change their ways of working. So they need support from a change management perspective to get there. So we've got a process transition function that does that as well. So there's a lot of different elements, a lot of moving parts. It's very broad, and it changes a lot. But that's kind of the breadth of what our team focuses on.
That's absolutely fascinating, really fascinating. I guess I have a question. If when you are in any of these conversations with management and when you're doing these tools where you can replace a junior person's 4 hours with a 30-second push of a button, is there a discussion of how that impacts the training of junior lawyers? Because when they're not spending 4 hours learning it themselves, and they're not, how do you get that? How do they get trained?
Yeah, Jan, look, a great point. So there was an article in The Australian, which is one of the national papers over here, that came out on Monday with an interview that our CEO and my boss did. But that was one of the topics that so the advice generator solution that I mentioned earlier, we're quite openly saying that the intention is this is replacing the work that typically might be tasked to a junior lawyer. And a lot of the press who were at that conference, that was their question. Okay? So what do the junior lawyers do? This isn't a new problem though, Jeff. This is from the very beginning of us doing document automation, which we've done for a long time, well before I joined the firm. Ultimately, what we're doing is we're taking the precedent document, the template of what is the best version of that document, and then we're using technology to generate that document and populate it. And some of our document automation technologies can be quite complex. So it's not just simply putting a field in here and putting a name in there. It's really saying, okay, well, in this situation, bring this clause in and remove that clause or change this wording in the clause. It can be quite complex what we're doing in document automation. It takes a while to set it up, but once it's set up, it's there. But that, again, is work that junior lawyers would do, right? A junior lawyer would be drafting that and then getting the feedback from their senior lawyers saying, well, actually, in this context, it's different. And through that, they learn their trade. So we haven't nailed this yet, and it even says that in the article. This is the real challenge I believe that exists, is how do we now train our junior lawyers? Now, what I will say, going back to the T, being a junior lawyer will start to look very different. So it's not about coming in and doing document review or precedent drafting or some of those really basic things that the junior lawyers would typically have done. Part of their role will also be coming in and getting familiar with these technologies and how they work. And understanding how the technologies will produce these outputs, and even to a certain extent at the right level, understanding how the back end, which is typically what teams like mine would do, how the back end or the logic in the back end works. So, for example, the advice generator that I mentioned, unfortunately, I can't show you the actual interface, but when you generate, it's like ChatGPT, when you generate the draft of the device, it comes up in a similar kind of format. You can copy and paste out of it, but then you can also click on the citations and bring up the actual document that was referenced or the large language model referenced to produce the output. The other thing that we included, though, was an element that we called thought process, which is, it's the prompting in the back end that we have done with the large language model that helps the lawyer understand what did the large language model do, or what was it instructed to do to go about taking that content to produce the draft. So a junior lawyer would have the opportunity to go in and say, here's the draft the large language model produced, here's the content that it based that draft on, and here is the thought process that the tool went through in order to produce the draft. So in theory, they can almost use that to learn this focus on drafting documents without actually having to draft the document themselves. But Janet's great point. I think that's a real challenge for us, for many law firms going forward. What defines being a junior lawyer will change vastly in the next 5 years even, or even almost now.
Anybody else have any final thoughts or questions? No? Okay. Very good. Well, Ken, thank you again so much. I think this was a great session. I have a couple of things that I think I might follow up with you on, but I hope you enjoy your holiday party, and I hope we see everyone else online again. Tomorrow is our last day of At Large, and we've got impact financing topic and a speed networking topic. So if you're not registered for those and you're interested in either of them, feel free to send me an email and I can help you out with that. And just a reminder that a survey will pop up at the end of the session. And I hope you take a few minutes to give us your feedback.